Let's set aside the facade. The history of Halloween isn't merely eerie. It's astonishingly peculiar. We're discussing a holiday rooted in soaring on broomsticks, carving frightful faces into turnips due to a man being rejected by hell, and ludicrous dating games involving cabbage. This is not just another tale of the supernatural. This is the wildly unhinged, true account of the origins of Halloween. 1. That iconic image of witches riding broomsticks against a luminous moon has absolutely nothing to do with overcoming gravity, and everything to do with something astronomically high influenced by hallucinogens. The tale originates from an actual practice involving a powerful mix referred to as flying ointment. This was not sorcery. It was the domain of illicit herbology. To keep up, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below your viewing location. Witches concocted a perilous blend of psychoactive flora such as belladonna, henbane, and mandrake into a thick paste. The optimal method for absorbing these substances was through mucous membranes. Thus, they would apply the ointment to a staff or broomstick and well ride it. The ensuing psychedelic experience was so overwhelming that it created vivid sensations of soaring levitation and journeys to other realms. They weren't actually in the sky. They were sitting in a hut completely intoxicated, experiencing an out-of-body moment courtesy of some highly imaginative botany. 2. Prior to the cheerful round pumpkin becoming the official emblem of Halloween, the original jack-o'-lanterns were carved out of frightening turnips, truly nightmarish creations. Forget joyful faces. The Irish and Scottish would carve these twisted pale root vegetables, etching ghastly tormented visages into them, inserting a hot coal inside to make their grotesque features flicker in the darkness. This was not merely a playful craft endeavor. It served as a method of supernatural pest control. They were crafted to drive away the roaming spirit of Stingy Jack, a fabled trickster so loathed that after being denied heaven, he was also personally expelled from hell by the devil himself, condemned to wander the earth eternally, carrying only a burning coal inside a turnip to illuminate his path. These frightening lanterns sent a clear warning. Go haunt someone else's doorstep, Jack. 3. In the 19th century, Halloween transformed from a night of ancient dread into what was effectively the Victorian version of a dating app. It became one of the foremost matchmaking occasions of the year, a rare chance for young singles to socialize and flirt within a society constrained by rigid social norms. The entire celebration was restructured for romance. Gatherings were filled with games and fortune-telling rituals, all sharply focused on one objective: uncovering the identity of your future partner. So while the eerie supernatural vibe lingered, it was directed toward a different kind of fear, the chilling anxiety of becoming a lonely spinster or bachelor. It was less about repelling demons and more about the equally daunting task of maneuvering through the 19th century dating landscape. 4. If you think contemporary dating applications are unconventional ways to seek a life partner, they pale in comparison to the Scottish custom of forecasting your future husband using cabbage. On Halloween night, a young single woman would be blindfolded and sent stumbling into a vegetable patch. Her task was to pull up the very first cabbage she could manage to grab. This wasn't for dinner. It served as a full-fledged evaluation of her future partner. A long, straight stalk signified he would be tall and handsome. A short, knobby one implied quite the opposite. The amount of soil clinging to the root hinted at his financial status. And here's the kicker. The actual flavor of the dirt was purportedly indicative of his character. Can you imagine having to explain to your friends that you chose your husband because his cabbage root had a reliable taste? 5. Another quirky tradition from the Victorian dating handbook was the pursuit of discovering a soulmate's initials in an apple peel. This game necessitated great focus and a steady hand. A young woman had to meticulously peel an apple, ensuring that the skin remained intact in one continuous strand. If she broke it, the enchantment was lost. If she succeeded, she would then swing the lengthy peel around her head 3 times before allowing it to drop to the floor behind her. The gathered party would then lean in and examine the resulting shape. The letter it most closely resembled was thought to represent the first initial of her one true love. It was a tradition that demanded an immense level of optimism and an exceptionally broad interpretation of what qualifies as a letter, rather than mere chaotic scribbles resembling discarded fruit debris. 6. Forget about a simple sweet treat. At Halloween gatherings during the Victorian era, one might be presented with a slice of the ominous cake, a dessert that supposedly had the power to forecast one's future. This was not merely a cake, it was a high-stakes culinary predictor of fate. Concealed within the batter were several tiny charms, and what you encountered in your slice would dictate your fortune for the upcoming year. Discovering a ring indicated a surety of marriage. Finding a coin meant wealth was on its way to you. However, if you happened to crunch on a thimble, it spelled social doom, signifying you were destined to remain forever single. You can easily envision the nail-biting suspense as everyone took their initial bite, hoping fervently for a wedding ring, while dreading the disquieting clink of a thimble against their teeth. 7. In ancient British folklore, Halloween night was regarded as a particularly busy period for the devil, who was thought to be engaged in his annual nut gathering. Yes, the Prince of Darkness, Satan himself, was believed to spend his night gathering hazelnuts. Because of this association of nuts with the infernal, they became essential instruments for divination, particularly among couples seeking to test their relationship. A couple would place 2 nuts upon a fire grate, each representing one of them. If the nuts roasted harmoniously side by side, it signified a stable and blissful union. Conversely, if they hissed, cracked, and violently leaped apart, it was an ominous sign foretelling a future rife with disputes, infidelity, and a dramatic breakup. It was the original and far more theatrical test of relationship compatibility. 8. The primary reason people commenced dressing up for Halloween had nothing to do with looking adorable or amassing a stash of candies. Instead, it was a grim and urgent act of self-preservation, a tactic to deceive actual demons. The ancient Celts were convinced that on the night of Samhain, the veil separating the living from the dead became thin, enabling all sorts of malevolent spirits and supernatural entities to wander the earth. To avoid being recognized as defenseless humans and thereby possessed or taken to the underworld, individuals would cloak themselves in the most grotesque manner possible. They would don terrifying masks crafted from wood and drape themselves in the skins and heads of animals to blend in with the malicious spirits, effectively employing a strategy of supernatural camouflage to survive the night. 9. That delightful crackling bonfire you gather around with friends to roast marshmallows possesses a name with a chillingly literal background. For the original bonfires were precisely that. Enormous conflagrations fueled by real bones. During the Celtic festival of Samhain, Druid priests would construct massive pyres and cast the remains of slaughtered cattle into the flames as part of a sacred ceremony. This was not about warmth or illumination. It represented a potent act of purification and a method of communicating with the spirit realm. The smoke rising from the charred skeletons was believed to have protective and purifying attributes. So, the next time you're delighting in a jubilant bonfire, just keep in mind that its name originates from a far more primal, visceral, and undeniably intense ancient custom of igniting skeletons under the autumnal sky. 10. Long before perfectly sculpted plastic masks of superheroes and cinematic monsters became available at every corner store, one of the most prevalent and effective methods of disguising oneself for Halloween involved blackening one's face with soot. In Ireland and Scotland, where the tradition of guising began, this served as the ultimate budget-friendly costume. Both children and adults would simply scrape a handful of black soot from the interior of a chimney and smear it liberally across their faces. It was simple, cost-free, and incredibly effective in rendering you entirely unrecognizable to your neighbors as you roamed from house to house. This approach was not intended to appear frightening or humorous. It was focused on achieving complete anonymity, transforming you into a shadowy, featureless denizen of the night set for mischief. 11. While we now link pumpkins with eerie carved visages during the Victorian era, a pumpkin could also serve as a rather inventive party invitation. Instead of sending a letter or card, it became a whimsical custom in certain social circles to deliver an entire uncarved pumpkin to a friend's doorstep. This act was not just a random gesture of gourd gifting. It served as a delightful and unmistakable invitation to their Halloween celebration. It was an enchanting, almost covert method of communication, transforming the pumpkin itself into an emblem not of fright but rather of the upcoming social festivities. This change illustrated a transition in the holiday's emphasis from ancient fears to a more joyous celebration of community enjoyment and, of course, the pursuit of a suitable marriage partner among the other attendees. Now, if you believe the cabbage ritual was a peculiar way to seek love, brace yourself for the terrifying mirror gazing with death, a truly chilling Victorian divination game. On Halloween night, a young woman was expected to take a candle and an apple, then sit alone in a dimly lit room staring intently into a mirror. The objective was to catch a glimpse of her future husband's reflection appearing over her shoulder. However, this came with a horrifying danger. If instead of a dashing suitor, and she were to witness the visage of a skull, it was a grave omen foretelling that she would pass away before ever having the opportunity to marry. It was the ultimate gamble of romance. A high-stakes game of Bloody Mary, where the reward was a spouse, but the consequence was a shocking glance at her own mortality. Now, one of the most peculiar yet surprisingly thoughtful Halloween customs originates from Germany, where families made it a point to conceal all their knives prior to going to bed. This action wasn't motivated by fear of the spirits using the knives against them. Quite the contrary. It stemmed from concern for the well-being of the ghosts. The belief was that the spirits of loved ones who had passed would come back to visit their homes on Halloween night, and families wished to prevent them from accidentally hurting themselves by encountering or stumbling over sharp objects. It's a wonderfully strange blend of eerie and welcoming, acknowledging that your home is populated by ghosts, yet your primary worry is their safety. You might assume that a being capable of moving through walls wouldn't have difficulty with a kitchen utensil, but caution was taken nonetheless. The familiar tradition of trick-or-treating has its origins in a much older and more solemn practice known as souling, which entailed singing for the dead in exchange for soul cakes. Centuries ago in Britain and Ireland on All Souls' Day, impoverished individuals and children would go from door to door offering to pray for the souls of a family's departed relatives believed to be trapped in purgatory. In exchange for these prayers, the household would present them with soul cakes. Small, round cakes, often flavored with nutmeg and cinnamon, sometimes featuring a cross marked on the top. It was a straightforward exchange spiritual services for a sweet delicacy. This established the foundational door-to-door model of Halloween. But the currency was not the thinly veiled threat of a toilet-papered tree, but rather piety and remembrance. Now, while many contemporary Halloween practices emphasize keeping spirits and ghouls out of the house, the ancient Celts were far more inviting, literally setting a dinner plate out for their ghosts. During the Samhain festival, they believed the boundary between worlds became extraordinarily thin, allowing the spirits of their ancestors to come home for the night. To honor and embrace them, families would set an additional place at their dinner table, complete with a generous portion of food and a drink. It was a gesture of remembrance and hospitality, treating their deceased relatives not as frightening apparitions to be dreaded, but as cherished guests returning for a family gathering. It was a lovely act that perceived the supernatural not as an invasion, but as a family reunion. That charming expression, "Your neighborhood kids knock on your door trick or treat," didn't always convey such innocence. In reality, the first instance of it in print presented it as an outright threat. A 1927 newspaper article from Alberta, Canada detailed how young rascals were intimidating homeowners. It outlined the unspoken agreement of the night: provide them with a treat, or they would execute a trick. The article clarified this was not a playful inquiry but a definitive ultimatum. It essentially served as a miniature shakedown, a form of festive extortion where candies and sweets were the fee you paid for protection against vandalism. This represented a notable shift from the prayerful souling towards the mischievous and often destructive iteration of Halloween that was about to dominate America. The contemporary and relatively benign custom of trick-or-treating actually originated from a need for protection against vandalism. In the early 20th century, especially during the period of the Great Depression, Halloween in America transformed into a night characterized by extensive, destructive pranks. It was referred to as Mischief Night, and it presented a significant challenge. Adolescents and young men would wander the streets, upending vehicles, shattering windows, igniting fires, and generally unleashing chaos. Exasperated communities and local organizations, unable to curb the vandalism, devised a clever plan. They resorted to bribery. They began to arrange official trick-or-treat events, prompting children to go door-to-door collecting candies as a means of keeping them occupied. The unspoken understanding was straightforward. Homeowners would provide candies to kids as a preventive bribe to deter them from soaping their windows or igniting their rubbish bins. It's hard to visualize today, but in the 1920s and 30s, Halloween in several large American cities escalated from mere pranks to outright anarchy, with authorities nearly capitulating to hordes of unruly youths. This wasn't merely a handful of kids tossing eggs. We are referring to thousands of teenagers orchestrating citywide chaos campaigns. Newspapers from that time chronicled gangs of young men rampaging through the streets, derailing streetcars, smashing hundreds of windows, setting massive bonfires in the middle of intersections, and even flipping over vehicles. Law enforcement was frequently overwhelmed, forced to retreat and merely attempt to control the destruction. In certain instances, cities were effectively held captive by this Halloween unruliness, which ultimately compelled community leaders to tame the holiday by advocating for organized celebrations and the candy-based bribery system we recognize today as trick-or-treating. While contemporary Halloween pranks might consist of a dash of toilet paper in a tree, pranksters of the 19th century in America had far more ambitious and labor-intensive objectives, such as entirely relocating a neighbor's barn. In rural areas, one of the most legendary and bold Halloween tricks involved a group of young men quietly descending upon a farmer's property in the stillness of the night. They would meticulously dismantle an entire outbuilding, often a privy or a small barn piece by piece. Then, with remarkable effort, they would reconstruct it in a ludicrous and inconvenient spot, like on top of the farmer's home or spanning a narrow country road. Awaking to find your outhouse perched upon your roof was the quintessential indication that you had fallen prey to very dedicated and strong-willed prankster neighbors. The 1970s and early 80s witnessed the emergence of a distressing phenomenon known as the Halloween sadism panic, an urban legend that swept across America, instilling irrational fear. The narrative, amplified by sensationalistic media portrayals, suggested that malevolent neighbors were concealing razor blades and poison in Halloween treats to harm innocent youngsters. Parents throughout the nation were petrified, leading hospitals to offer complimentary X-rays of candy bags and schools outright banning Halloween festivities. The oddity lies in the fact that it was nearly entirely fictitious. Sociologists examining the phenomenon discovered virtually no validated incidents of strangers randomly poisoning trick-or-treaters. The panic serves as a classic illustration of mass hysteria, a social contagion driven by anxieties over societal decline and the belief that peril lurked behind every friendly neighbor's door, irrevocably altering public perception of the holiday. The widespread urban legend regarding strangers distributing poisoned candy is by and large a complete myth. However, it tragically springs from a genuine murder that catalyzed this national scare. In 1974, a man from Texas named Ronald Clark O'Brien administered a pixie stick laced with cyanide to his 8-year-old son, resulting in his death. O'Brien also provided poisoned candies to his daughter and 3 other children to create the illusion that a random maniac was responsible. His motive was disturbingly straightforward. He had recently procured a substantial life insurance policy for his children and was deeply in financial trouble. He was apprehended, found guilty, and executed for his heinous act. This horrific and isolated occurrence of a father taking the life of his son was distorted by media and public trepidation into the prevalent myth that anonymous strangers posed the real threat. In the early 20th century, prior to the establishment of contemporary safety regulations, and executed for his crime. This horrific, isolated incident of a father murdering his own son was twisted by the media and public fear into the widespread myth that anonymous strangers were the real threat. During the early 20th century preceding modern safety standards, Halloween presented a significant fire risk just waiting to occur. The holiday represented a perfect combination of flammable items and open flames. Frequently, children's costumes were crafted at home using highly flammable materials such as paper, crepe paper, and cotton. When this is coupled with the widespread practice of placing lit candles within jack-o'-lanterns, it creates a formula for catastrophe. Newspapers from that era are filled with alarming stories and accounts of children's costumes igniting, resulting in serious burns and even fatalities. This issue was so prevalent that community organizations and fire departments issued yearly advisories, urging parents to opt for flashlights instead of candles, and to fireproof their children's delicate, easily ignitable costumes. During the Second World War, Halloween in the United States was effectively halted, or at the very least put on an extended hiatus. The main factor was the rationing of sugar. With sugar being a vital resource necessary for the war efforts, the notion of handing out bags of candy to children was simply impractical. The government's strict rationing policies meant there was barely enough sugar for daily consumption, let alone for a celebration focused on indulgent sweets. Consequently, the swiftly growing tradition of trick-or-treating came to an abrupt end. The holiday did not vanish entirely. People still organized small gatherings and dressed in costumes, yet the practice of collecting candy door to door, which had begun to gain popularity nationwide, was unofficially halted for the duration of the conflict. After World War II, the unexpected champion of Halloween emerged in the form of the candy industry itself. With sugar rationing no longer in place, candy producers recognized a golden, untapped possibility. Before the war, the majority of treats distributed were homemade cookies, nuts, or pieces of fruit. However, now, candy companies initiated extensive advertising campaigns to rebrand Halloween as a holiday centered on candy. They heavily pushed the concept of distributing small individually wrapped candies as the ideal hygienic and convenient treat. This marketing effort was immensely successful, converting the holiday from a community-oriented event featuring homemade treats into a multi-billion-dollar commercial powerhouse, forever associating Halloween with the widespread consumption of name-brand chocolate bars and candies. During the challenging years of the Great Depression, when money for luxuries such as store-bought costumes was non-existent, American children showcased their ingenuity by crafting masks from common household items, including empty flour sacks. Families during the 1930 seconds simply couldn't afford fancy outfits, so inventiveness became a necessity. Children would repurpose old paper grocery bags or the coarse burlap sacks that once contained flour and potatoes, cut out eye holes and decorate them with spooky, ghoulish, or humorous faces using charcoal or paint. These basic, often eerie masks became emblematic of trick-or-treaters during the Depression era. It was a perfect reflection of that time, a holiday characterized by fantasy and escape, constructed from the remnants of daily life, demonstrating that money is not essential to create something truly haunting and unforgettable. For a holiday so closely linked to a single vegetable, the Great Pumpkin scarcity of 2011 was a genuine crisis for Halloween fans, constructed from the remnants of daily existence, demonstrating that one doesn't require wealth to craft something authentically unsettling and unforgettable. Unusually heavy rainfall and flooding, especially in the northeastern United States, devastated pumpkin crops, leading to a significant shortage just prior to the peak season. News reports incited panic nationwide as families hurried to secure a suitable gourd for carving. Prices soared, and numerous pumpkin patches were left with nothing but bare land. This incident served as a peculiar reminder of how reliant an entire cultural celebration had grown on a single agricultural product. It was a moment when a shift in weather threatened to disrupt a cherished tradition, causing widespread concern over the risk of a Halloween without jack-o'-lanterns. Long before we had electromagnetic field meters and ghost hunting television shows, generating considerable unease regarding the likelihood of a Halloween devoid of jack-o'-lanterns. Years ago, well before we possessed EMF devices and television programs about ghost hunting, individuals depended on a far simpler technique to sense a supernatural presence: observing a candle flame. An ancient and widespread piece of folklore asserted that if you found yourself in a room on Halloween night and your candle's flame suddenly flickered and changed to blue, it was a clear indication of a ghostly or spiritual presence in the room with you. This wasn't merely a draft. The specific alteration in color was regarded as definitive evidence of a visitor from beyond. You can picture the chilling atmosphere this would create. A group of individuals gathered in a poorly lit space sharing ghost stories when all of a sudden, the candle's warm orange light shifts to a ghostly blue, plunging everyone into an intense, terrified hush. Hi. In a twist of fate almost too perfect to be real, the world's most iconic escape artist Harry Houdini passed away on Halloween night in 1926. While the official reason cited was a burst appendix, the circumstances unfolded dramatically, resulting from an unexpected punch to the abdomen that he had not anticipated. Prior to his death, Houdini, a fervent skeptic of spiritualists, vowed to his wife Bess that if it was feasible to communicate from the afterlife, he would find a method to send her a coded signal. For a decade after his demise, Bess hosted a séance every Halloween, yearning to reconnect with her departed husband. She never received the anticipated message. This yearly séance evolved into a notable ritual, eternally linking the master of escape to the one final lock he could never unlock. Hi. While children in costumes had knocked on the White House door for numerous years, the first individual to genuinely bring the Halloween spirit inside was First Lady Eisenhower in 1958. She was the first to extensively adorn the presidential residence for a Halloween celebration, moving away from the typically formal decor. She converted the White House into a haunted mansion, complete with skeletons dangling in the foyers, jack-o'-lanterns beaming from the tables, and even witches riding broomsticks hanging from the chandeliers. The event was organized for the children of the White House staff, fostering a playful and eerie ambiance that stood in stark contrast to the usual political gatherings. It set a standard that future First Ladies would emulate, establishing the White House as a joyful and occasionally spooky part of the national festivities. Hi! The Bogeyman. That terrifying, formless entity parents use to frighten their kids into good behavior may have origins rooted in a very tangible and frightening position. One theory posits the word derives from the buggy men of medieval England. These figures weren't monsters. They were merciless tax collectors known for their cruelty and intimidation, instilling real fear in the common populace. An alternative theory connects the name to Scottish boggarts, malicious household spirits that cause items to vanish and milk to spoil. Whether he was an overly harsh tax collector or a playful spirit, the bogeyman emerged from a palpable sense of worry and fear, a title assigned to the nuisances that lurked in the darkness, both literally and economically. Hi. When the first European settlers arrived in America, they brought their folk customs along. However, not everyone embraced Halloween. The holiday's earliest and most ardent opponents in the New World were the Puritans of New England. With their rigid, austere brand of Protestantism, they viewed Halloween and its related festivities with profound suspicion. They regarded the rituals, bonfires, fortune-telling, and costumes as pagan at best and outright satanic at worst. They actively suppressed such celebrations, effectively prohibiting Halloween in their colonies. It was only due to the later influx of large Irish and Scottish immigrant groups in the 19th century that the holiday was reintroduced to America, setting in motion its gradual evolution into the widespread celebration we recognize today. Hi. While most individuals may not consider it, there is a fierce, long-standing rivalry over the title of Halloween capital of the world, the city of Anoka. Minnesota asserts a strong claim as it is credited with hosting one of the first citywide Halloween parades in 1920, specifically aimed at reducing youth vandalism. They officially hold the trademark for the accolade. However, each year this claim is informally contested by Salem, Massachusetts. Basking in its grim history from the 1992 witch trials, Salem morphs into a Halloween paradise throughout October, hosting an extensive festival named Haunted Happenings that attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors. While Anoka possesses the official documentation, Salem's worldwide reputation as the epicenter of all things witchcraft makes it the popular champion in this peculiar contest for Halloween dominance. Hi. In one of the most unusual intersections of popular culture and politics, the Halloween season has unexpectedly turned into a remarkably reliable gauge of political sentiment, particularly during years when presidential elections occur. Over the years, analysts and journalists have identified a strangely consistent pattern. The sales figures of Halloween masks featuring the presidential candidates frequently serve as a predictor for the election's final results. The candidate whose mask achieves the highest sales ultimately secures victory in the election. While this isn't a formal polling method, it reflects public sentiment based on whom individuals prefer to embody for an evening of amusement or jest. Whether this reflects popularity, infamy, or simply which mask is the most entertaining for gatherings, this mask polling method boasts an impressively accurate history. It indicates that on some instinctive level, the American electorate may choose their leader based on which individual would create the most entertaining Halloween persona. If you had to select one political mask this year, which would it be, and what's your reasoning? If this unusual fusion of humor and data has provided you with a fresh perspective on elections, please hit that like button, share with your friends interested in politics, and subscribe with notifications enabled so you won't miss the next fascinating truth concealed in plain view. We appreciate your viewership. See you in the following episode.